Hello. So today I'm going to talk about a very important question somebody asked me, which is about the career options in finance after the age of 40. He in fact wanted to ask me how is midlife crisis in a career in finance. It comes from a different area, not from finance. So he wanted to know actually, and he's quite young actually. He's in his 20s, but thinking about life after 40. Um, so I wanted to share this, my view on this question. I'm not yet 40 actually, but I've seen many people above 40 working with me. It's been several years actually. I've been working with highly senior people, people in their mid 40s, even mid 50s, some even in the early 60s. In Europe, actually, can work beyond 60. So, unlike in many other countries where you retire at the age of 60, that's not the case in Europe. So, you will come across people working with you who are above 50 or above 60-year old. So, how is a career in finance when you reach the midlife, right? It's a very important questions because more recently I see a lot of senior peoples from tech are getting fired for no fault of theirs. They have been working with the company for several years, several decades even, and all of a sudden they're being fired. And the reason being, tech is becoming a more of a young people sort of career, right? For example, most of the good coders or programmers are very young people. It's becoming more like chess, right? The younger you are, the more chances of winning in that sport, right? In chess, that's what is happening in coding also. Also because of the constant change in the technology related to software development. To keep up with the change, it's very difficult for someone in his mid 30s or in 40s to compare to someone who is just entering the job market. So you make good money actually early in your career, but at some point of your life you realize that you're not as good as the young guys who are entering the job market, right? That's also the case in many other technical field, um, right? For example, in manufacturing, for instance, if you work as an engineer for many years, you can't work as an engineer, a real engineer actually beyond a certain age. That's actually quite challenging physically, even, right? Unless you become a manager, an executive, it's very difficult to carry, uh, to survive beyond certain age. And that's also with other career options. But how about in finance, right? It's also true to some extent in the field of finance that beyond a certain point you saturate, you don't grow, and not everybody is lucky enough to become an executive. There's just few positions, right? As Peter Drucker, the great management thinker, used to tell, that there is very little room at the top. That means there are simply not many positions actually. So, despite you being really good, there is very little chance that you will make it to that level, that you will become an executive. And unless you become an executive, what do you do, right? You become a manager at the age of 35, and what do you do? Because above the manager, it's like the board member minus one, MBB minus one. What do you do after that, right? You still have 20-25 years ahead of you. In the field of finance, it's a bit better actually. It's been, in my experience, it's a bit better. It's practically impossible to replace those highly experienced people with the young people, right? Doesn't matter if you have an MBA from one of the world's best university, or you have a CFA, you're highly qualified, very smart, energetic, fine. But unless you have the experience, nobody will trust you. Finance is all about trust. So it's not just about the qualifications, it's not about the certifications. They do matter, no doubt about it. But what really matters is your experience. It's more like, in the field of medical science. No matter how great a doctor is, he's very young. You will not go for surgery with him, right? You will go for someone who actually more experience at doing it, right? That's exactly the case is in the field of finance. Trust matters him a lot, and people trust the ones who actually who got real world experience, long real world experience. of doing number of things, talking to client, talking to regulators, understanding the business. Finance is a very, very, technical field, in the sense that you are supposed to have a good understanding of lot of products. You should have good understanding of markets, and consumers, and the corporate clients. It's not easy to find someone who is good in all of the things, unless you have worked with the bank for 20 years. It's impossible to find someone who is comfortable with all these things, right? It's not like you become a top coder in some competitive, in some coding competition, and then you can replace a 10-year experience software engineer, and take his place. That's impossible in the field of finance. At least I have never seen that. In some of the quant field, it is possible, but again, like 1 year experience guy replacing a 10-year experience guys, I've never seen. Right? Maybe a very smart 5-year experience guy can replace a 10-year experience guy. That's quite possible, actually. Right? There are other things as to why in finance, actually, the midlife crisis is less of a concern compared to in other fields. One is the regulation also protects. Um, you're supposed to have certain years of experience for some positions. If you're going to get a senior analyst position, senior expert position, the regulation requires the bank to filter candidates who got at least 10 years of experience. So you are somewhat protected by the regulation. So that's one other thing. Automation is very difficult in the field of finance. That's what you have seen, right? How many innovations have you seen in the field of finance and banking for the last couple of decades? Barely any. In fact, a friend of mine who works in e-commerce, he tells me that the last innovation the banking world have had was the ATM machine. After that, there has been no innovation since then. Well, I beg to differ. There have been quite a number of innovations, but it's just that it's not as good as in other fields. For example, in e-commerce or in other not so regulated fields. It's a good thing. It's a bad thing. The good thing is that if you have too many innovations happening in an area which is so sensitive, right? Because small mistake can really create havoc, actually, in the field of in the economy, not just in the banking world but in the general economy. And we have seen that happening in 2008 financial crisis. So people don't want to take chances. Innovations are not too encouraged in the field of finance, except in certain areas, for example in payment, for example. And that's exactly the reason why you see that fintechs are struggling to challenge the big banks, right? They were challenger banks. A decade back they were called challenger bank. They're still the challenger bank. I don't know when will they be able to actually challenge these big banks. The big banks are still the big bosses in the field of finance. um, so uh, so that's another reason why the jobs are a bit protected, right, up to certain age. The other thing is that the entry barrier, right, in the field of finance, you cannot start a company right away, unlike in other sectors, right? You need license, like government license, regulatory license. That's a time taking process, right? For a fintech company to get a banking license takes a decade, more than a decade even, right? So you will therefore not find this the creative what is that called, creative destruction, right, happening in the field of finance. It hasn't happened, at least in the last 30-40 years. The biggest banks 30 years back are still the biggest bank in the world, but that is not the case in the case of in the manufacturing or e-commerce or high tech, right? Things have changed in those fields, but not certainly not in finance. So point I'm trying to make here is that therefore the mid career opportunity is still there in the field of finance. I mean, you still, your skills will still be valued, actually, even after you reach certain age and certain experience level. um, All right. Regarding the AI and automation, right? This is the perhaps the biggest challenge our generation is facing, and we're thinking that a lot of the jobs will be obsolete. And many banks have fired people in the last few years. But compared to how many other tech firms have fired, the number of firing that has happened in banks is lot less, right? Um, if you work at a branch, right, local branch, then your job is problem because that's very easy to automate. But if you work in compliance and risk and quantitative finance, investment banking, audit, in those places, it's very difficult to replace someone working in compliance with just a robot. In fact, the robot itself will require a compliance guy to look after it. So, in fact, the role of risk and compliance and analytics and quant, those roles have actually increased over time thanks to digitalization, thanks to use of data, and so on and so forth. So yeah, so beyond a point also, so and these roles are not necessarily just coding roles which require you just have knowledge about the programming language. It requires a hell lot of domain skills, product skills, and knowledge of finance. You should have the experience of talking to regulators, talking to senior executives. You will never ever find young people, very young people experience or have been trusted with those sort of responsibility. That's never the case. So there is some level of hierarchy, which is is a good thing, bad thing, but it's really does help actually if you have reached that age where you feel like, okay, I'm feeling a bit insecure because the new guys coming in and they might replace me. That is still a concern in the field of finance. I'm not saying it is not at all a concern, but it is certainly not as big a concern as you might have seen in other fields. Right. Just wanted to share my own experience. If you are already in that league, please let me know about it in the comment section. Thanks for watching, and I'll come back with another video. Thanks, guys.